Registering for GST. Now recently somebody asked us about registering for GST and how it's very frustrating because the limit is so low and it means that you end up out of pocket as a business owner. Now we're going to walk through an example of this, and if you do have to register for GST, perhaps a way to go about it that may help you ensure that you don't lose out on any sales. Now in New Zealand you typically have to register for GST under a compulsory mechanism once you have turnover in a 12-month period that will or exceeds $60,000. You can also voluntarily register also. But what people are talking about is they're doing a side hustle or they're doing a business and eventually their sales are going to go past $60,000 and they're frustrated that they're then going to have to register for GST because they see it as another tax to pay. So this is obviously one way to look at it. But unfortunately, the rules are the rules, and once we register for GST, we can then claim the GST costs on the things that we purchase also. Now, let's take an example of somebody who is out there and they're doing well and they're getting to around $58,000 worth of revenue, and they can see that in the next 12 months, because it's any 12-month period, not just a financial year, but often a financial year is when people will look more closely at this. And they can see that sales are going to continue to increase and it's time for them to register for GST. Now, they're going to have to increase their prices by 15%, otherwise it will eat into their profits, because if they don't increase their prices, then when they do their GST return and return the income, a portion of that is now going to have to be put aside for GST and paid to the IRD. Of course, it will be slightly offset by any costs that are going out, but if you don't increase your prices, then you will lose out. So what I suggested to a client recently, and to actually somebody in the comments who asked about this, is that you need to look at the date at which you are going to be GST registered, and from that date, you have to put your prices up by 15%. Otherwise, you have to accept that your profits are going to be eaten into, because you would have to move some of that aside and give it to the IRD for tax. So let's take a Pilates studio or a side hustle physio, or maybe doing some lawns and gardening. If you don't increase your prices, then of course you're not going to keep the same level of profit. So you're effectively forced to increase your prices by 15% from that date so that you can maintain your sales and therefore your profit. Because otherwise, let's say that you GST register and then you go and do $10,000 worth of lawn maintenance, well, you would have $10,000 worth of sales, and that would include GST, and then you would have to put the GST portion aside for tax. Now, that's how you would have been doing it if you don't increase your prices. So then you increase your prices and your $10,000 would actually be sold for $11,500, and you would put the $1,500 aside, and that might be offset by some expenses, some fuel and maybe some repairs and going to the rubbish tip, and then you would have to have the $1,500 collected less the GST payments that you've made across expenses. That gap will go to the IRD. So unfortunately, you're kind of forced to increase your prices if you want to maintain your profitability, because by not increasing your prices in the first piece there, you're having to withhold GST out of that $10,000 and put it aside and pass it on to the IRD. Now, I promise you that this is less scary than you realise, and if you write to your current customers or explain to the people that you are doing work for that you now need to GST register, and your prices will then include GST, so they once were $100, they'll now be $115. Most people will understand that it is what it is because they're used to paying GST their entire life. So you'll find very few people would say, oh, well, I can't afford that anymore. You know, it's a price rise that's not even really your fault. So it's even easier than, hey, we're putting our prices up by 15%. And I think the piece that you're missing is explaining it or communicating it in that way. Unfortunately, the customer and the consumer effectively get shafted because they're the ones that end up paying the extra cost. But what I would suggest for you is to own it from a date, and if you need to, then have a compelling text or email or explainer that you can lean on to tell people that you're now having to charge GST. And that will help you work through that. So you might even email all of your clients. Hi, I love the support that I've had from all of you. As I continue on this journey, I learn more and more about tax, and I now realize that my next chapter of this will mean that I need to start charging GST. Unfortunately, from the 1st of December or January or whatever, I'm going to need to add GST to my invoices. So your whatever would be 15% more, and there is not much that I can do about this, and I value your support so much. Thanks for supporting me over the years. I'll be very surprised if you get a high percentage of people coming back saying that's bullshit. A, it's not even really your fault, and B, you've communicated it very well. So please, if you do have to register for GST, lean into that, and you will have to increase your prices. Otherwise, what happens is you're going to go down the path of there's no point registering, therefore there's no point in even doing this, the government take too much tax from me, this sucks, why do they hold us back? I get a lot of that stuff, and I've been there and thought some of those things too, and have that with business owners that I'm working with all the time, but it's part of the rules, and the way to solve it is by increasing your prices. Now, the way that I said to do it via that email, if you were going to do that, you may go to ChatGPT and say to it, hey, this is the sort of business that I run. I'm now having to register for GST. Help me write a short, sharp, punchy, on-brand email to people, or even text message that I can use if people ask me about it. So don't let it be the thing that stops you, from going to the next level, because it's a ceiling of $60,000 that can cap people. Well, I'm not going to do any more of that because I'm losing 15% to GST straight away, and then I'm losing, more to income tax after my expenses. You want to keep going, and you want to ensure that people are paying the GST, and you're moving it aside into a separate account, and you can, pass that to the IRD and keep going, getting closer to your goals, and not letting it be the thing that stops you. I appreciate that it's frustrating, but for a lot of us, it is the rules, and we have to play by those, but we don't want it to be the thing that stops us from progressing ourselves closer to the things that we got into business for.